It's that time of the year when I'm expected to talk about the books I read this year. So here it goes: two poetry collections, two short story collections, two novels, and a few non fiction works. The first poetry collection is the collected earlier poems of Anthony Hecht. Since I read Anthony Hecht about 6 months ago, his poetry has become the kind of concentrated comfort to which I return every once in a while. I think two things happen when you read a great poet. Firstly, you marvel at the easy world of sounds, the endless permutations that hold up a world that seems to me to be more real in its denseness than the world of prose. But the second thing that happens is that you think that this great poet, has now exhausted the patterns available in formal English. By formal, I mean, of course, metrical poetry. Hecht is a formalist in that sense. But then, as you read the poet, you discover that just about any kind of patterns are still possible. And then, after a while, you read another great poet, and you again think that this poet now has exhausted all the patterns, and it still hasn't happened. In a way, every great poet kills the future of his language. In this collection, the books are The Hard Hours, The Summoning of the Stones, Millions of Strange Shadows, and finally The Venetian Vespers. In the first two of these books, Hecht is concerned, I would say he's too concerned with the tragic idea of life. He repeatedly brings up the Holocaust. But as you go into Venetian Vespers, the tragic element engages more with nostalgia, with childhood, than with that tangible event which was the Holocaust. And the Venetian Vespers has matured itself into a place where Hecht can take the smallest of aesthetic objects and turn it into a very elaborate idea. The second book of poetry I want to talk about is the selected works of Osip Mandelstam. Now, I've made a separate video about Osip Mandelstam, but I want to talk about this book as a highlight of this year because, well, the style is so original. It's just the images are so vibrantly alive and they're so original that even through translation, the images shine very starkly, and it's not like an image that anyone can replicate at all. Osip Mandelstam's poetry is, I like to call it, transparent, shimmering wisps, and he somehow can play with these wisps, he somehow can bring them together. Now to the short stories. I actually own this one that I'm going to talk about. It's traditionally called The Nine Stories by Salinger. It was published under that name. But this collection, which has the same stories, the title is For Esme, With Love and Squalor, which is one of the stories in this collection. And I had been sleeping on Salinger for a long time. I actually had not admired his most famous novel all that much. But Salinger, I found out, is a short story wizard. He conveys narratives through dialogue, and dialogue as a way of advancing the plot is something that I have not admired until now. That is until I read Salinger, and he does this beautifully, and he uses gestures very well as well. So yes, this was a surprise for me, as I did not like his novel all that much, but he really shines here. And the first story here is I think the most famous Salinger story, actually, with that weird title, A Perfect Day for Banana Fish, and that is his masterpiece. I don't think any other story here compares to that one, but the whole collection is just beautiful. The other collection is Pigeon Feathers and Other Stories by John Updike. I always want to review Updike with the care and restraint with which he himself writes. And most of me reviewing and reading Updike is just me saying, "Oh, I just love him," because he has this metaphysical depth to him, which has become increasingly rare. But alongside that, he has an exceptional eye for craft, and he's never indulgent. So he knows how to keep that narrative extremely taut. He talks about this in his interviews as well. But for Updike, I think I've talked about him before, but what I keep seeing is that his style is original, of course, but the metaphors he uses are so inbred, you see. I think that might be a difficult word for me to justify, but those metaphors only make sense within the world he creates. That metaphysical world of his is so personally his that if you take the metaphors out of that context, they just struggle to even stand up. And Updike even when he writes something that reads like a journal. There are a few stories in this Pigeon Feathers collection that are very short and that read like a journal, but even then the craft is so evident. The Pigeon Feather story itself, the title story, is a good story, but all of the stories in this collection, I could not find a single story that I would say is, mediocre in any way. So yes, I strongly recommend Updike for anyone, and especially for aspiring writers. Now to novels, which is my favorite category. The first novel is not that well known. It's called The Street of Crocodiles by Bruno Schulz, and he's a Polish writer. I'm not sure if it's even fair to call it a novel, but all of the stories are tied together by certain characters that keep reappearing. So I think I'm justified in calling it a novel, although it's structured like a short story collection if you look at the contents of it. And its style is novel, it's different. It is characterized by a few things. It is characterized by epithets that undo descriptions. So you'll frequently encounter words like starless, dreamless, pathless, soundless. So he keeps on projecting objects and then drawing them back, projecting emotions and drawing them back. That is one thing that characterizes his style. Another thing is that he goes into these wild forays of elemental description. The sky is rarely ever neutral. And the third thing that characterizes his style is vivacity and melancholy that are united. So you'll feel like you're reading the style of a bipolar artist, because these things are so exaggerated. And among all these stories, all these chapters that the novel is divided into, the section Pan is just perfect prose. It's perfect prose. You'll not encounter something of the sort even in 100 books that you read randomly. And Comet is sort of the weak piece. So I hope you read this. I think this is a novel recommendation that I can make. It's sort of a contribution, I feel. The second novel I want to talk about is a bit of a cliche. It is In Search of Lost Time, the first volume, The Way by Swans by Marcel Proust. This is the newer Lydia Davis translation. When I first read Proust, it was almost 7 years ago. I was in the 9th or the 10th grade, and at that time, I read the Moncrief translation. And what is there to say about Proust? His style is characterized by metaphors that are drawn out to their end, by similes that aid their metaphors. It's just one layer of image after another, one connection after another. This is the style. The theme of flowers, that tangle that Proust creates between petals and pettiness, that tangle is just highly sophisticated. He uses these flowers to bring back certain emotions. It's almost like a fragrance of emotions that he creates with flowers. And at one point, I think I had reached about 300 pages of the book, and I just realized that I had gone 50 pages of the book without the writer having even once lost that sense of reality. Not of realism. By reality, I mean that that world, even for one moment, did not feel to me like it was not making sense within itself. And that is Proust's ability. He is just so much in the minds of the characters that world just comes alive vibrantly. It comes alive in a way that cannot seem to you escapable in any way. So that is his supreme talent. And I should also mention that, as a child, I was much more content to read something just for its ideas. I had not learned yet to keep an eye out for tiny details, and which I do now. And that technique, just that switch in that habit of reading, just makes a huge difference in someone like Proust. Because anyone averse to reading for its own sake simply cannot complete all of the volumes of Proust. It's just that theme of society is just veneer. So what is happening is just play of details, play of things that to the common man, to the Philistine, seem like things they would not even bother about. Now on to non-fiction. The next book I want to talk about is The Venture of Islam, the first volume by Marshall Hodgson. And I like this book not so much because of its historical depth, but because I just admire the historian's mind so much. This particular historian's mind is so finely attuned. It is not prejudiced to even mystical forms of worship. Of course, the historical part of it, I am not fit to judge between scholarly debates about the book, about the matter it's dealing with, but this thorough analysis of culture, this going very deep into the psyche of people, of their faith, all the implications of that faith, which are unapologetically, for the author, they are unapologetically mundane and transcendent at the same time. So he deals with the mundane implications of thought, and he doesn't shy away from discussing the transcendent implications of thought. He understands that the religious mind, that the mind that hankers after religious truths, can be transcendent, can be looking for a form of escape from the human condition. This philosophical sympathy he has with the religious mind, as opposed to a very simplistic form of oppressor oppressed narrative. This sympathy just matures the book. It's highly delicious. The book is delicious. The third book I want to talk about is Institutions, Institutional Change and Economic Performance by Douglas C. North. And this is a writer who won the Nobel Prize for Economics. And this book has set me on the path to solving a few questions about which I had been struggling for some time. The first question is, what exactly is the nature of the non-market element that supports the market economy? And the second question is, how do you explain the stubbornness of state actors and non-state actors in countries that are so reluctant to follow Western economies, that obvious path of success? And the third question is what beats in people's hearts as important a determinant of, say, private property rights as what happens in the courts? Now, this study is extremely cautious. It develops the theory of path dependence, which explains how organizations respond to the incentive structures set by institutions. Institutions are simply broadly defined as the rules of the game. So, for example, in a country where it is more profitable for state actors to grant monopolies to particular companies and then create rents out of that monopoly, and there is no legal system that combats that, there is no institutional structure that punishes that kind of close access, then state actors behave in that way. And differently, in a country where it is more profitable for state actors to restrain, to suppress monopolies, they behave in that way, because as state actors, they are participating in this organization called the state, which is responding to the broader institutional structure, the incentives set by the institutional structure. This theory of path dependence is extremely important. It's developed convincingly in the book. And the second thing is this concept of transaction costs, which is not a new concept in economics, but the author here argues that institutions, the way they are arranged, can reduce or increase transaction costs in such significant ways that in some societies it is simply not profitable for people to transact, because the structure that guides those transactions, both formal and informal structures, simply aren't there. Now, finally, in nonfiction, the highlight of the year for me is Alasdair MacInytre's After Virtue. MacInytre actually passed away this year, the previous year. I finished reading his book in my Kindle, then I liked the book so much that I went to look for it in the bookshop, and I found it there. And I came home, and the next day I received news that MacInytre had passed away. May he rest in peace. Now, this is one of those books that just change completely how you think. Only if man has a purpose can we think of virtues as something that helps him reach that purpose. So once that teleology is lost, once that sense of purpose is lost, the very idea of virtues, the very idea of morality becomes a tool for nothing in particular. So you see, it can be wielded by anyone for their own ends. So he gives Nietzsche credit for this. He says that Nietzsche is right in his analysis of morality, but only if we take the world as it exists after the Renaissance, after Kant and the subsequent philosophers destroyed that idea of a human purpose, which was there with Aristotle. And so he goes deep into what Aristotle believed that purpose was, but he takes it a step further. He goes into his own analysis of how virtue is to be employed collectively and personally to achieve that end of life, that good to which Aristotle so frequently alludes. So when I reviewed this book for the first time, I said that this book is like a diagonal plank that connects the different parts of a bookshelf, and it does this extremely well. These are the books, and I've got my Kindle here because I read most of my books this year and for the past 5 years in this thing, and I love it very much. And feel free to type in the comments about the books you read. And please, if anyone has any idea about contemporary novelists, contemporary short story writers who can compare with Updike, who can compare with Proust, please mention them in the comments below. I'd be grateful. I'd be extremely grateful.